and ensuring that we have a consistency with the positions in the Auditor General's office and the rest of the city. So in that first 30 days, we'll get the job descriptions and begin recruitment for the senior positions in the audit office. Structural necessities in that initial period. I've begun developing a budget for 2022. We did have an allotment for the remainder of the 2021 year, and we've assigned that out to certain areas. But I think looking forward really is the discussion that we'll be having with this committee about what the budget for 2022 will look like. Space, yes, we need people to have a space to work. I'm currently located in the West Annex, just over on West 10th, so kitty corner to City Hall, which I think is a very practical location for dealing with City Council and with city senior management. As far as administrative policies and procedures go, as I mentioned earlier, bylaw section 5.7 and 5.8 contemplate a review of the city's policies and procedures to ensure that there's no impingement on the independence of the office. That's ongoing. I haven't seen anything huge at this point, and I don't believe that there will be, but it's a process that we do have to go through. And of course, we need the information technology, computers, peripherals, and all of that. I'm very pleased to say that when I showed up on the first day, September 7th, I walked into an office that was already set up, and very soon an IT support person came in with a computer and a cell phone and all the other bits and pieces. So I'm very pleased to actually be able to be connected to the rest of the city really within hours of actually starting. So very appreciative of the city's IT department for being on top of that on day one. Knowledge of business. The bylaw contemplates the Auditor General determining what standards will apply to the work that's being done, and the background work that had been done for the recruitment committee by the Canadian Comprehensive Audit Foundation, CCAF, suggested that there were 3 potential frameworks that the audit office could follow. I've looked around at what other local government auditors in Canada are following, and indeed they have followed each of the 3 different standards in different cities. We have internal audit standards, which we could follow, and some cities use that. We have an internal audit department at the City of Vancouver, so I'm not really sure that that's the appropriate framework. There's also an American standard called the Yellow Book, which applies to local government auditing. And again, I'm not sure that's the appropriate framework because, we are in Canada and we have perfectly good Canadian audit standards for assurance engagements for the public sector. And that is what I intend to follow. It's what I'm most familiar with. It worked very well at the Auditor General's Office of British Columbia, worked very well at the Auditor General for Local Government's Office. And so I see no reason to not proceed with that. To that end, I've been in touch with the Chartered Professional Accountants of British Columbia, and will be registering the audit office as a practicing office with the organization next week. My audit license will be transferred over to that, or my practicing license as an individual will transfer over, and so we'll be set up. We should take comfort from that because what that means is an adherence to professional standards for all of the work. It means that just like any other practicing office in British Columbia for any private or public sector auditor, we'll be subject to independent external review to ensure compliance with Canadian auditing standards. I've already commenced meetings. I've met with a couple of members of council already and will continue doing that. I've met a couple of members of senior staff already as well, and will continue doing that. I also met with the Director of Internal Audit, Tony Hoy, and we had a really good conversation. A question that has come up quite often as well, will there be overlap between the 2 areas? And that's something that Tony and I very much agree we do not want to do. It doesn't serve the city's interest. And so what we discussed was, how we're going to coordinate our work programs to ensure we have, understanding of the areas that would be his areas and areas that are my areas. Also, we talked about the potential for coordination with staff. He has some staff that have particular skill sets that I think would be quite useful, whereas my staff will be composed generally of largely of generalists. He has some very specific technical expertise and was quite welcoming in the idea that perhaps I could borrow some staff from time to time when and as needed to bump up my capacity rather than hiring expensive external consultants. It's a win-win for the city in that regard. We also talked about how we'll handle whistleblowing complaints as they come in. And what we agreed to is that as they come in, we'll convene and we'll talk about who's best positioned to address that. In some cases, it might be more practical for an external audit. In other cases, it might be something that Tony's team is able to handle immediately and without an awful lot of investment. So again, I think that's a win-win for the city. They'll get the right people applied to situations as they arise. I've met with legal and FOI as well. That's something that I brought up during the interview process, a general concern about how Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act will be applied to the work of this office. Work that's the audit files, excuse me, of the Auditor General of British Columbia and the local government auditor were exempt from that act. And in this case, they aren't, but we do have to work through to make sure that the FOI operates in a way that does not impede the effectiveness and independence of the office and maintains the confidentiality of those who are providing information.
Chair Fry, I think we might have lost Mike. To give us a second so we can connect with him. Mike, are you still on the line?
Well, let's take a quick pause while we see if we can get Mike back on the line.
Looks like it's a bandwidth Wi-Fi issue on his end.
Chair Fry, might I suggest a 5-minute recess and we'll connect with him.
Sure. Okay, folks, we're going to take a 5-minute recess. I think Mike doesn't even know he's not connected because it looks like he's still advancing the slide queue. So we'll take a 5-minute recess. We'll be back at 1:31. back over to you, if you can remember where we lost you.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. I'm just going to confirm that I have the right slide up for where you lost me. Deputy City Clerk said it was slide number 9. Does this look about right?
That is correct.
It does.
Excellent, thank you. So I'll start from the top on this one again. So in the intermediate priorities under knowledge of business, I'll have met with the advisory committee. We'll have the audit manual drafted, and we'll have whatever policies and procedures are necessary put in place. One thing I wanted to conduct was an external audit orientation with council, and I believe we have a meeting scheduled. The purpose of that is twofold. It's really intended to be a two-way exchange of information. On the one hand, it's to enhance council's knowledge with respect to what performance audit is, what they can expect from it, what the process looks like, what they can expect from me, and what things are going to look like from their end. But on the other side of it, I'm really looking also for input as far as putting the plan together, what priorities are, and really to brainstorm, groupthink, if you will, what everybody is thinking in the room about where the priorities could be, and very interested in that input. There we go. Okay, so we're into the final period, the tertiary priorities. This is the operational structure that I've been looking at to have in place for the office over the long term. So under each audit principal will be an audit team composed of 2 or more people at different levels, recognizing that there will be growth in different roles. And so the red boxes are employees. The purple boxes would be contractors. So the EQCR, or Engagement Quality Control Reviewer, is actually a standards-driven position as required. It's essentially a second partner review for the audit each audit. And what it is we have an experienced individual come in, go through the file, and see if the individual reaches the same conclusions that the audit team did, the same conclusions, recommendations based on the findings that have been put together, and would write a report to me saying to that effect that yes, they found no deviations from standards, and that I can have confidence that the file is appropriate and appropriately supports the findings and recommendations in the final report. The technical reviewer is really a person for each of the audit team leaders, the audit principals, to lean on. The technical reviewer is again another experienced auditor, can speak to particular technical issues in relation to audit. Could be sampling techniques, it could be interview processes, it could be how to craft messages in the final report. It's something that isn't required under standards, but it's a practice that was adopted by OAG Canada a number of years ago, and I think has been very effective in ensuring good quality of audits that have come out of the Auditor General for Local Government's office over the last few years. We'll be hiring principals, begin the manager recruitment process in this final phase, and training. Well, I don't know what training needs will be. It will be depending very much on the skills and experience of the individuals that we're able to hire. Fortunately, I've done an awful lot of performance audit training myself over the years, so that's something that I'd be more than happy to do again and take on as just part of helping staff become better acquainted with their responsibilities, and part of my opportunity to get to better know the abilities of the staff. Structural necessities. Okay, so we'll put the contractors will be put out to open tenders, so requests for qualifications out in the public domain. We'll draft our audit templates, which are really just the nuts and bolts to ensure consistency between audits and conformity with Canadian audit standards. I will begin reaching out to the larger community, the First Nations, business leaders, regulators, again, as part of informing my understanding of the city, and then have to you by January 30th the audit plan so that we have compliance with the Auditor General Bylaw section 3.9. So what's not in here? What you didn't see in here was me engaging in a large media engagement strategy. I did a couple of interviews when my position was initially announced, and that was fine. But as I told them, and I wish this had been reported actually, but I'm not the story. the work is the story. And so that's really is where I want to leave that. When we have work, I'll be very open and available to the media to help ensure that there's a good understanding of what's in our reports and what the recommendations and findings actually mean. But that's the story, not the individual here. Top 3 risks. That's not a typo. Getting the right people in the right place, the right time is going to be a challenge. It's a difficult market right now. Fortunately, I've reached out to a couple of folks and who I think would be good fits, and they are interested. But you know, we have a lot of spaces to fill. I'm of the view, quite honestly, that it's better to proceed without a full complement than to hire the wrong people into positions. It's the issues of hiring the wrong people, the wrong fit, the challenges associated with that far outweigh any benefits of having somebody actually in a role and trying to do a job that they might not be well suited for. Status update. Yes, this is my 9th day, and I'm very pleased to report that I have detected no instances of non-compliance with Section 2.3 of the Auditor General bylaw. Now, what that is that all city staff are required to respect and support the independence of the Auditor General. And in fact, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the city manager and his team for the work that's gone into having the office prepared, and also the office of the city clerk for all the work that they have done, ensuring that the office is set up and that I could, to the best way possible, hit the ground running. And so we've begun a contracting process to get the support so we can develop proper job descriptions and whatnot. We've had outreach to the province. So anyway, I think we've made as much progress as could reasonably be expected in a very short amount of time. And that wouldn't have been possible without the full cooperation and support of city staff. So my thanks very much. So that brings to a conclusion my presentation, and welcome any questions.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And I'll just preface my bit here by saying I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty with my chair panel, so forgive me. I do see Councillor Kirby-Yung and Councillor Bly on the queue, but it's not possible for me to track who was on first, although I know Kirby-Yung was. So we will open it up to questions from the committee members, and please add yourself to the Creston queue. Archie and Karen, you're going to have to use the raise hand function, which is located on the lower right of your WebEx panel. And if any council member would like a second round of questions, the member will need to raise the motion during the first 5 minutes when they have the floor. So on that note, Councillor Kirby-Yung, questions of Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to Mr. McDonnell for the presentation. Appreciate it. Given that this is a public and an open meeting, and so if you will, not an introduction, not just to yourself, but really importantly to the function of Auditor General for the city for the first time, I wanted to pose a couple of questions from the perspective of channeling the public, which I think are going to be, and I think where the interest is going to be is, how do the public weigh in if they have a suggestion or input with respects to a topic for audit, potentially an area of concern?
Mm-hmm.
Then perhaps you can, secondarily speak to that in terms of how are those audit priorities determined? And so I'm asking from the public's perspective. So I'll start with that one. I've got a couple of questions for you, but that's my first one.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you very much. And interestingly enough, I've already had input from the public. Emails have been sent to the city clerk's office and were forwarded to me, and I've responded to them from members of the public. I think it's really important that the audit office be open to input, but it's really important also to say, well, thank you very much for that input. We'll take it under advisement, and I mean that in all seriousness. Take it under advisement. That's not to dismiss the input at all, but that doesn't necessarily constitute a commitment to actually doing a particular project that might be suggested by a member of the public. The avenue that I would like to put in place to do that is I haven't set up in the first 90 days, first 100 days, excuse me, but it is part of the sort of, if you will, the next 100 days, and that is getting in place a website for the audit office. So if you look at other local government auditors in other cities, they all have their own independent web pages, and that would provide an opportunity for input in a secure way. And obviously, any information that members of the public provide would maintain confidentiality with that. But I think it's really important that that interested citizens have the opportunity to make suggestions, whether that's through the formal whistleblowing process or whether that's through a note, quite frankly, to me or my staff.
Okay, so we have a limited amount of time, so just reflect back for what I heard for clarity is that there will be a dedicated mechanism, email or otherwise, and probably some information forthcoming for how people can do that. But in the meanwhile, information through the regular channels, City Clerk will be forwarded on to you, correct?
It has been so far, yes.
Okay, that's fantastic. And then the second question that I have too that may also be one that comes forward, and I might have as a counselor, and others the public may have expectations of us, is we often have topics that we hear about quite consistently, such as how do we know that the City of Vancouver is getting value for its rental policies in terms of what we're giving up in DCLs, for example, and is the value there in terms of that, and related to that in terms of those funds when community amenity contributions or development cost levies are coming in, is the city getting value for what they're expending them on in terms of delivery? So I guess the question related to that is, are those sort of large style questions on your mind? And that's something like, will audits run the gamut from something like that to things like operations as to, are we efficient in terms of managing our urban forest? Maybe you could just give us a bit of perspective.
Well, those all sound like excellent potential topics. And without committing that they're going to be on the audit plan necessarily, I think that those are ideas that I actually would welcome the opportunity to explore further when we have our scheduled meeting next week, and or the week after. In any event, when we get together, and I would like to learn more about those to explore those potential areas.
Okay.
One thing I will say in terms of putting the audit program together is, again, not knowing what staff I will have, but likely having a very new team that haven't worked together. I think it's important that we learn to walk before we run. So my thought will be that our first few topics will not be necessarily the most complicated that we could come across. Some of those areas sound, in fact, like they could be quite detailed, and quite complicated, and quite technical. Okay. And so that to my mind is going to be a very relevant consideration as we put the plan together.
Okay, and with my very last little bit of time, my question is, if you're a member of the Vancouver public listening to this, or if you're going to be learning about it, why should they care that we have an AG now?
Well, I guess if they're interested in knowing that the city is operating with a due care to economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, that they're getting the best value for their tax dollars, then I hope that they would care.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you so much.
And well timed at 5 minutes. Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. Councillor Bly for 5.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mike. Great to hear from you today. I just wanted to flag, you mentioned about the Auditor General Advisory Committee. Could you just offer a little bit more detail in terms of how that advisory committee will function? And perhaps already we have a number of advisory bodies on various topics, identity, intersectional lens, and all. And so I'm wondering how you see the advisory committee coming about and the role the public can play, what they could expect from that process, if you have any line of sight to that at this time.
Certainly. Well, let me speak to advisors perhaps then in two aspects, Councillor Bly. One, the advisory committee is really to help better inform me and over time my team about relevant issues in the city, and I'm looking for that to be a broad cross-section, representative cross-section of a variety of interests. I am aware of the city's policy with respect to representation on advisory committees, and that speaks specifically to council advisory committees, if I'm not mistaken. I'm really looking for to fill in gaps in my knowledge, and fill in gaps in my understanding of how the city operates and where key issues may lay. So I expect that advisory committee will change, the membership of it will change over time as we have different, as people have sort of said their piece and moved on to other things. The other part with advisors speaks to individual audits. So I mentioned earlier that I expect the staff to be comprised largely of generalists. And so for each of our audits where we get into a special area, we will have technical advisors that will be part of the audit team that will provide that level of expertise. So it could be in planning and development, it could be in construction, it could be in managing urban forests and whatnot. It really depends on the nature of the topic. And this is a pretty normal and common audit practice in legislative audit offices across the country, so that we have that level of expertise, because it's impossible for a team as small as ours to be experts in everything. There will be people who will have certain levels of expertise in certain areas, but by and large, we'll be relying on the expertise of independent third parties who will be an integral part of the audit teams.
Great. Thank you very much. Just a quick follow-up to that. Does that mean that, especially in the construct of a technical advisor, depending on what the focus is, that sort of formation of that advisory committee could be seen to alter or change over time? Do you expect?
I fully
Right.
expect that it will, yes.
And will some of the membership on that type of committee remain static, in the sense that there'll be some consistency with other roles changing?
I think it would just depend on the individual advisors if they feel that they wish to be part of the process on a go-forward basis, or whether they've, as I said their piece. I think turnover will be important on that group, but also consistency. And so I expect that the group will be meeting probably no more than a couple of times a year, and as always is the case with busy people, not everybody who'd like to attend a session can actually attend. So by default, there will be a change from meeting to meeting.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you for
Pleasure.
explaining in detail that piece of your presentation, which I have seen before, being part of the recruitment committee, but equally is interesting. What I don't think you mentioned, but I think perhaps I have certainly heard you talk about before, is around the Office of the Auditor General really being an opportunity also to tell good news stories. Could you offer a little bit more in that perspective that for me certainly stood out in the recruitment process, in terms of your thinking outside the box, in terms of what people would typically expect out of this office?
Well, thank you, Councillor Blythe. That's another great question. And yes, it did come up during the interview process. And in fact, I think I put that in my letter of introduction. But I think it's a really important principle of the credibility of the office, that auditors should report with equal vigor news that is good, as well as news that perhaps cites or points out opportunities for improvement. And I think it's important that we select audit topics that are important, not necessarily ones where we think that there are problems. And that's just a fundamental principle of how I would like this office to conduct its work. I think that the challenge that auditors face is that there's an expectation that every audit that they have is going to have a long list of opportunities for improvement. The challenge with if you will, always conveying what could be perceived as bad news is that it rather than reinforcing confidence in the institutions of government, it can have the opposite effect. It can erode that confidence. And so I really want this office to be seen as an honest broker. And if we come across nothing but positive findings, I will be very happy to report that with the equal degree of vigor and energy as I would report findings that suggest need for improvement.
Okay, great. I think that's my time. Thank you very much.
It is your time. Thanks, Councillor Bly. Councillor Wiebe for 5.
Yeah, it's the first time seeing the presentation. It's great. It's exciting. I think the city of Vancouver is really excited to see what this could look like. My first question is, you've talked about the difficulty in this market right now to find strong staff. I'm wondering, are you going to do a phased approach where you might do a smaller office and it will grow over time, recognizing this is the capacity I'll be able to do over the first little bit, recognizing you won't be able to hire all the positions necessary to run a full AG office, recognizing the
That's a fair consideration, and at this point, I don't know what we're going to get. I believe that that the city is a very competitive employer in this market, but we're also looking for people with very specific skill sets, and there aren't a huge number of them out there. So for the senior positions, I think it's really important that we stick to our guns and ensure that we get people with the right experience. The more junior levels, really, you're looking more for the right mindset. Can they become good auditors if they don't have a ton of experience in that area? Can they become good performance auditors? Because a performance auditor and a financial statement auditor are very different skill sets. They're both highly trained and highly skilled, but they're not necessarily identical. And a good performance auditor might not be a good financial auditor, and vice versa. And so, just because somebody has worked in audit per se doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the right fit for this office. One option that has come up in previous conversations that I would look at potentially is, if we can't get people in positions quickly enough, excuse me, would we be looking to potentially contract out for individual positions? And that is definitely a possibility if it can be done in a cost-effective way. So that's another option to consider. As far as the scale goes, I think that that's very likely to be an inevitable outcome of the recruiting process, whether I want it to be or not. In a perfect world, I'll have everybody in place and ready to go very early in 2022. I think, as we all know, the world is far less than perfect, and we'll have to do the best that we can with what we have, and that may mean a scaled ramp up.
Okay, appreciate that. Second question is, cities are now looking at well-being budgets, triple bottom lines, really involved in social justice and other things. So auditing for where the pennies have gone, where the dollars are being spent, sometimes isn't really the outcome that certain programs are trying to accomplish. I'm just wondering, recognizing the change in municipal governance and the outcomes that we're trying to deliver to our citizens, can you talk about how it won't be a traditional system and we can be more adaptive to the new structures of what municipalities are trying to deliver?
Yeah, that's a great perspective, and I think it speaks to how we prioritize the audits that we'll select. Um, I believe it's the City of Toronto has a requirement that they have to identify the cost savings associated with each of their audits. And well, I think that's identifying cost savings where it's practical to do so is an absolutely fantastic idea. But as you correctly point out, there are some very important projects that are done by the city that don't necessarily have huge dollars associated with them, but do have high impact. And so when you speak to triple bottom line reporting, for instance, the financial element is only about one of three aspects of looking at how you measure success. And so I would like to look at the whole gamut of what success looks like and what importance is constituted, and not just the financial bottom line.
Okay, so that means in your recruitment, you'll be looking for people that have an understanding of that triple bottom line and can pull in that type of data when you're trying to pull an audit together.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, right, like it's a different skill set than might be the traditional auditor. And so I'm just wondering how you look to recruit that, and yeah, how would that job description look like?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that that's a common component of anybody who's had much experience in performance audit, that is more than looking at just the financial bottom line. And so that's why you look at performance audit teams in legislative and local government audit offices across the country are comprised of people who have a combination of skill sets. You have some that will come from the accounting world, the CPA in particular, and that audit background, but also folks who have advanced degrees in sociology or other arts that provide them with a different perspective and a different capacity to assess and analyze information.
Okay, and one last question. How do you see these committee meetings looking? Like, how do you see the public viewing, and what do you see these meetings being in the future? Recognizing today was your presentation, but how do you see these meetings moving forward?
Well, my experience with meetings of this would be with the Public Accounts Committee of the Legislative Assembly for the province of British Columbia, where findings are presented by the auditor, and the subject of the audit has the opportunity to respond. And while we do our best to ensure that 100% of recommendations are accepted by the auditee, there may be instances where they don't necessarily agree, and they have the opportunity to state their case. ideally, we would like to then have the auditee focus on what their plans are to address the recommendations and timeframes and who's doing what. And then it provides you with an opportunity, members of this committee, to ask the auditor questions and to ask the auditee questions about the nature of the work.
Thank you.
All right. Councillor Weave, you got an extra minute there, so don't tell anyone. I give you extra time. So I don't see anybody else on the question queue, although I did see Archie and Karen's names added to the crest on. Maybe I can just get a confirmation. Was there, or a wave from Archie or Karen if they wanted to ask a question? Or oh, I'm seeing a head shake from Archie, and oh no, I am seeing the hand up from Karen. Hi, Karen. Okay, let me just switch over here and get your mic on. And please go ahead for 5 minutes, Karen. Thanks.
Yeah, a lot of my questions have been answered, but more of a comment. I do appreciate and support many elements of the 100-day plan that you put forward, Mike. And I think it's important that you come back with a 3-year plan as you suggested, rather than the 1 year required, because what the difficulty will be is setting the priorities for audits. And I don't think you can do that in a 1-year plan, whereas you can lay out over a period of 3 years key areas that are important and should be a focus of your office, because there will be limited resources, and that plan should be based on understanding the key risks of the city. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you're going to identify those. And then last comment would be, when you bring forward the plan, can you also indicate how your approach to communicating findings beyond what you just talked about a little bit, but leading up to the finalization of a report?
Sure. Well, the identification of key risks, and oftentimes auditors' work plans are described as being 100% response to risk. I believe it's a combination of risk and importance that would drive the audit plan. Is really part of that knowledge of business investment that I spoke to in the presentation. Meeting with members of council, meeting with key stakeholders, meeting with members of management, receiving input from interested stakeholders and the public with respect to areas of concern or of interest, and coordination with any risk assessment processes that have been done by the city, either through the internal audit or through the finance department's areas of risk assessment. And really, it all feeds into a better understanding of the city's overall risk environment. I correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm of the understanding at this point that there has not been a comprehensive risk assessment done. And if I am wrong, then I would really love to have it very sooner rather than later to help me better understand the risks that the city has already assessed. I'm sorry, the second part of your question, Karen, if you could please remind me, was which, sorry?
Just your approach to developing and communicating findings.
Yeah, thank you. The very fundamental principle that I've heard referred to as the no surprises rule is something that I have been putting out to all members of the city staff. As the audit process progresses, we go from planning to conducting to reporting. As we are determining what our key findings are, what our conclusions are in relation to the audit criteria, and then what recommendations might flow from those findings and conclusions, we will be discussing that in depth, in detail with the auditee, so that by the time the report is made public, by the time the presentation is made to council here, it will come as no surprise. City staff may not necessarily agree with the conclusions, may not agree with the recommendations, and that's fine. That's not a preferred outcome, but if that's where we are, then that's fine. But they will not be surprised. And if there is a surprise, then I will have failed in my communication mandate. And so I've asked city senior staff to hold me to that standard, so that there are no surprises. All recommendations and findings I anticipate will be put out in public. There may be very rare instances where there might be issues that cannot be made public for whatever reason, and those may be presented to council in camera, but I would suspect that that would be a very unusual circumstance. And in most instances, the results of audits will be public. And the other part of that is, if it's not in the report, then it's not something that I speak to. We only speak to issues of importance in our findings and recommendations, and that is really it. So the no surprises rule suggests you don't walk in with new information into the Auditor General Committee in a public forum and ambush people. I have no intention of operating the office in that manner.
Thank you.
All right. And that's the 5 minutes. And I see nobody else on the queue. Thanks very much, Mike and everybody. Since there's no decision required of the committee for this agenda item, therefore,
Mr. Chair, if I could interrupt, I believe that Archie has his hand up.
Oh, my apologies.
So, sorry, Pete. I don't have access to your queue, and I missed my first pass around when you came around to me. But I did want to make a comment, and really reinforcing what Karen was saying around the 3-year plan. I think, and I appreciated Mike's response on that, because a 1-year plan would not allow perhaps some of the more substantial reviews and projects to be undertaken. So I appreciated your response to that as well, Mike. And I thought your presentation, I really enjoy the sort of the flavor or the approach you're taking with approaching the committee and the activities of your group. And I think the cooperation and the collaboration that you sort of expressing will be very, very beneficial to the city and the citizens.
Thank you, Archie.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Since there is no decision required for the committee for this agenda item, and this concludes our agenda, our next Auditor General Committee meeting will be on Friday, November 26, 2021 at 1 p.m. Now, can I have a motion to adjourn?
A motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Councillor Hardwick. All those in favor say yay.
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 Opposed say nay. All right, the motion carries unanimously, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thanks,
weekend, everybody.
everybody.
Take care now.